Some years ago, I passed a lady in a hallway and had a 2-minute conversation with her about fear. And for 6 months after that, every month, she sent me a Starbucks card, I think every month, a Starbucks card, and thanked me. She said, "You don't have any idea how much what you told me has changed my life. Thank you." Would you like to know what I told her that was so magical? And let me just tell you, I learned it from someone else. This isn't something I invented or discovered. It's something in my quest to overcome my own fears I discovered. It works like this. There's simply 3 elements that I want you to understand about fear. First, conclude that fear is the enemy. Second, understand fear's lifeline. And third, conquer fear with honesty. Now, what I'm promising you is if you'll pay attention for just a few minutes and follow these points, you're going to see how to conquer your fears in your life. First, conclude fear is the enemy. Fear doesn't give good advice. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you'll pay attention, whenever you're afraid, whatever fear wants to do is not good advice. And there's a reason. Fear's trying to stay alive. And in order to stay alive, it's got to give you advice that perpetuates its fear, if we personalize it. And that's why you need to take a posture of seeing fear as an enemy. It doesn't really produce much good in this world. Now look, I get reactions. I know if there's a snake, you jump, right? However, even then, usually you jump into something and hurt yourself trying to escape from a bug or a fly or a mosquito. Fear itself is actually the enemy, and if you'll take that posture that my goal is to defeat this enemy of fear, you're going to find that the strategies I give you will work, because fear is the enemy, and fear doesn't ever give good advice. If it does, it's not often enough to matter. Number 2, understand fear's lifeline. Fear's lifeline is the imagined future. Fear is about the imagined future, and it's always a negative thing. That's what fear does. I have a friend of mine who developed a part of this process, and he calls it foinking, F-O-I-N-C. So when you foink, you turn into what's called a good person who's up to no good. The fear drives you to be over-controlling, and here's how it works. Fear of imaginary negative consequences. You run out in the future. Domino after domino, you see this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and it runs all the way out in the future into the fog of war, and you guess where it goes. And if you ever quiz people and know how to do this, you'll find out it always goes to the same place. The ultimate fear everyone has is dying alone. That combination. For some reason, ultimately, dying alone. I found this out working with our kids. We have 5 kids. The reason we have 5 is because we didn't want 6. 4 boys, 1 girl. And they're great. I like them. I love them. They're awesome. They're doing all kinds of fun stuff. But growing up, they would kind of run my wife. And the reason they run my wife is she had this secret fear that if she didn't give them lots of candy and love and spoil them and give them everything and have what we call Jody's Deli, where every meal was she'd take orders and make different things for all the kids. You can't do that with 5 kids, let me tell you. You got to go military, you got to give them gruel on a piece of toast and make that system run, or you'll wear yourself out and go broke, right? So she's doing this because she's afraid if they grow up and don't like her, they won't see her, let her see the grandkids, and she'll die alone. Now, she got over that, and now I'm not sure if they're going to let her play with the grandkids, but that's another story. Fear of imaginary negative consequences makes you over-controlling of this domino because of the fear that's going to happen out there. You know it's going to go bad. That's what foinking is. And so you're a good person up to no good because you're taking away other people's freedom to make choices. You're trying to over-control the moment. You need to first conclude fear is the enemy. Second, understand fear's lifeline, and that is the imagined future. Third, conquer fear with honesty. Conquer fear with honesty. Look, the truth is an acquired taste. I get it. It's much easier to keep pretending to ourselves what's going to happen. You run into that all the time in your business because you're sitting there showing somebody numbers, and there's no actual big debate about it. But they don't want to see that, or, some people occasionally, rarely, once or twice in your career. Conquer fear with honesty means this exact phrase: you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. Right? You know what you know. Have you found that? Did you know that? That you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know? Because if you don't know it, you don't know it. Now, you might not know that you don't know it. Sometimes that's another nuance. But you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. What this means is honesty is about the future. And what I would ask you, anything in your mind right now that you're afraid of happening in the future, I would ask the question, how do you know? Do you really know the future? How many of you are prophets? 1, 2, just a couple of you. That's good. Look, when you don't know the future, guess what? You can't be afraid of it. You're afraid of what you know is going to happen. Let me give you an illustration. If today you knew for a fact if you got into a car you would die, could we get you in that car? Now that's always risky because some of you may be having an off day, but most people would say, no, you couldn't get me in that car, and that's true, we couldn't. But you could die anyway. Did you know every time you get in a car it's a little risky? And you do. You don't know if you're going to die or not. So what you do is you wear a seatbelt, you drive safely, you stay away from people who are driving weird, you get a car with good restraints and technology, etc., etc. You try to be wise about it. And that's because you don't know what's going to happen. Whenever we know the future, we're not being honest. We're being dishonest, unless we're prophets. And pretty much all of us are not prophets. So when you can be honest about the truth and say, I don't know, everything will change. The simplest way to do that is to just ask the question, so what? This is going to happen. We're not going to turn the report in on time. So what? Then we won't meet our deadline. So what? Then we'll get chewed out by the boss. So what? Then we will get penalized. So what? Then we might get fired. So what? Then we won't find a job. So what? Then my family reject me. So what? Then I'll die alone. See how that works? Be honest. You don't know the future. And you just work backwards. How do you know you're going to die alone? How do you know you're going to get rejected by your family? How do you know you're going to lose your job? How do you know? As soon as you don't know, you're honest and you're free. How do you know you can't answer the questions they ask after a presentation? I want to conclude with a story I found years ago that I have always found helpful. I don't know if it's a Sufi or Chinese or where it comes from, but it's the story of a man and a son and a horse. This man who lived in this rural village had a son, no wife, no other children, poor, one horse, one corral. The horse for, the labor. The son leaves the gate open. The horse escapes and runs to the hills. And all of his friends come that night and said, oh, what terrible luck you've had. And he said, how do you know if this is terrible luck or good luck? And sure enough, the next day, the son is out there, and suddenly the horse comes back with a whole herd of stallions. They run the corral. He closes the gate. His friends come, the man's friends, and say, oh, what great luck you've had. And he said, how do you know this is great luck or poor luck? And sure enough, a few days later, the son was breaking one of the stallions and was thrown from the horse and broke his leg severely in a couple of places. And his friends came. I said, oh, what terrible luck. Your only son has broken his leg. And he said, how do you know if this is terrible luck or good luck? And sure enough, some weeks later, the army came to that village, conscripting every young man in that village to a war in which they all died, except that man's son. That is the power of realizing you don't know the future. That's the quickest way to conquer fear. Thank you.